Chapter 51 Zombie vs. Predator. Shit, shit, shit. Ludwig cursed as he saw the raging, hulking mass of muscles fully focused on him. The forest lizardman champion was enraged, its hulking, muscular form heaving with labored breaths. Orange, slitted eyes burned with primal fury, locking onto Ludwig like a predator eyeing its prey. Its spear gleamed ominously, slick with blood and fresh ichor from the fallen zombie, and its claws flexed in a grotesque rhythm, ready to shred anything in their path. The roar it unleashed was earth-shaking. Loose stones and dirt trembled from the sheer force of its bellow, and the champion's tail lashed behind it like a whip, splintering the nearby rock. It stormed its way toward Ludwig and then lunged for him. Ludwig didn't hesitate in stabbing the sword one last time into her other eye and hurled himself sideways. Not good, Ludwig muttered under his breath, his hands tightening around the ceremonial sword lodged deep into the queen's eye. He tried to pull it free, but the blade was stuck firm, and his growing panic only made his movements more frantic. The sword snapped in two in the process. Unarmed and clearly outmatched, Ludwig knew he had no way out of this. The moment the champion lays his hands on Ludwig, the "you died" screen will show up. And that was about to happen as the lizardman went for a full-body lunge at Ludwig, its massive clawed hand swiping at Ludwig with terrifying speed. Acting on instinct, Ludwig hurled himself to the side, barely avoiding the strike as it slammed into the ground where he'd stood. The force of the impact sent chunks of stone flying and cracked the cave floor. Ludwig rolled to his feet, his mind racing. He couldn't fight this thing, not head-on. His only advantage was the queen's prone form, which the champion hesitated to attack directly. Ludwig quickly darted around her, using her massive body as a shield to keep the champion at bay. The enraged creature hissed, frustration clear in its movements. It paced briefly, its tail lashing against the walls of the cave. Every time Ludwig moved to one side, the champion adjusted, snarling in barely contained fury. If the champion were to use his full power, he'll probably end up harming the queen further. Ludwig relied on that fact to use her as a barricade between the two of them as he was thinking of what to do next. The champion hissed and roared at the same time, rage further fueled by Ludwig using the queen as a barrier. The queen's health was depleting rapidly, especially since the blood wasn't stopping anytime soon and pooled around her. Just a little longer, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The queen's death was inevitable now, and once it happened, the dungeon should be clear. The champion suddenly roared, its patience snapping. It gripped its spear tightly and jabbed toward Ludwig with the speed of a striking snake. Once again, Ludwig dove out of the way, the blade narrowly missing his side. He hit the ground hard, the impact rattling his bones, but there was no time to recover. The champion's claws came down in a follow-up strike, aiming to pin him in place. Ludwig scrambled backward, his back slamming into the cave wall. His breath hitched as the spear's tip buried itself inches from his face, chipping the stone behind him. "I really hate this," he spat, rolling to the side and using the queen's body as cover once more. The champion growled, its frustration mounting as it circled the dying queen. It hissed low, snapping its jaws in warning, but it still didn't dare attack Ludwig through her body. Then, with a sickening final groan, the queen went still. Her health bar drained completely, and a notification flashed in Ludwig's vision. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. You have slain forest lizardmen queen. You have gained one feeble soul. Congratulations. You have activated the hidden piece of this dungeon. Old-fashioned key. By killing the queen before slaying the champions, the boss status is now transferred to Forest Lizardman Champion. The rewards for this dungeon have been deferred until you defeat the Forest Lizardman Champion. The quality of the reward has doubled. The Forest Lizardman Champion is enraged. Losing his queen caused him to go into a frenzy. All status ailments have been removed. One additional danger modifier, skull and crossbones, has been added. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Ludwig didn't even have time to process the implications before the champion erupted in fury. Its roar reverberated through the cave, shaking loose chunks of stone from the ceiling. "Oh, come on!" Ludwig cursed, backing away as the champion lunged forward. The beast's movements were wild and unpredictable now, driven entirely by rage. Ludwig didn't hesitate in dipping out while the lizard man was still raging out for the loss of his queen. Though this made Ludwig think of how come these creatures can feel sadness and rage, and if that could make them more human than him, he simply shook the idea away. He didn't have the time or luxury to think about that. Ludwig darted out of the cave, his mind racing. He needed a plan, anything to put distance between himself and the hulking monstrosity. Ludwig ran as fast as possible from the cave. "Use, feeble soul," Ludwig said as loudly as he could. "You have obtained 30 souls. Increase, wisdom, stat by 10. Ludwig shouted. Your wisdom stat had increased by 10. You have gained 1 soul level. You are currently level 3. You have used 30 souls. The next level up will require 4 souls per stat upgrade. Your wisdom stat affects your mana stat. Your mana has been increased by 100. Since you have leveled up, all ailment have been removed, all health and stamina has been restored." "Good," Ludwig said. There was a broken and severely mangled up corpse of a lizard man. This was the lizard man zombie from earlier that Ludwig summoned, and right around him were the bodies of 2 other lizard men that his zombie had killed. "Rise, undead." Ludwig chanted, though he didn't need to, but it sure as hell felt cool to say that. He slammed his palm on the ground. The necrotic sigils flared to life, spreading across the bodies in a web of dark magic. "Would you like to raise 2 undead corpses?" "Yes," Ludwig said, and almost instantly his mind felt as if it was sucked out with a straw. Mental exhaustion drew upon him, but he could stop. He shook his head and immediately dipped forward once the sigil of undeath was drawn on the ground. "You lack the understanding to summon a servant undead. Your understanding of necromancy has improved. Your affiliation with Deus Necros further eases the process of the summoning. You have called forth Lizardman Zombie. Warning, your current wisdom and charisma is too low to fully control Lizardman Zombie. He will consider you an enemy once he sees you. Ignore all the random notifications." Ludwig cursed at the system and dipped forward while the 2 zombies were waking up. His only worry was that if they start fighting each other. Ludwig didn't stay to watch the process. He bolted toward the nearby cliff, his increased strength making the climb easier. As he scrambled upward, he glanced back just in time to see the champion storm out of the cave. Its orange eyes burned with hatred, locking onto the 2 newly risen zombies. This time Ludwig didn't forget to inspect them. Inspect. Chapter 52 against 1. *****. Zombie Forest Lizardman. Level 11. Damage 60 to 80. HP 700. Tier Common. Status effects: the curse of undeath. The power of death moves this body. It knows no fear, no hunger, and no exhaustion. Skills: the aura of death. All undeads have a unique aura around them. For a zombie undead, the aura, contagion, is applied. Contagion: the zombie passively emits poisonous and toxic fumes and smells from its body. Once enough is stacked onto an enemy, they'll start losing their HP. A zombify: extremely rare chance to turn another entity that has been felled into a zombie after death. Minerzerk: the zombies do not stop unless their heads are shattered. Grow stronger the more damage they take. Law: a once proud lizardman now turned to undeath by an apprentice of the ways of undeath. Too young to be called a necromancer. *****. No wonder it won against those 2 lizard men. The lower its HP the stronger it becomes, and since those 2 lizard men were simply poking it around without actually killing it, they died to its stronger self later on. Ludwig spoke out loud. After all, he was right. That contagion passive, though, looks interesting. Ludwig muttered to himself but decided against staying here. He continued moving, ran around the lake and rushed up to the edge of the cliff. He was observing everything from earlier. With the increased strength from his former level up, the almost 90-degree cliff looked like an easy climb. Just as he thought he reached relative safety, the bulldozing champion lizardman came out roaring like a dragon this time, rage clear in his voice and power thereof. The whole forest behind Ludwig shook and the birds flew up during the cold night from sheer terror. Yet, All the Lizardman champion could see were his former clan members turned to undeath. It screeched once more, agony clear in its voice this time. It had been losing everything. Their rotting forms moved with jerky, unnatural precision, glowing red eyes fixed on their former leader. The humans today had come, threatened their survival, attacked their members and killed their queen. Not only that despicable human also turned his members into undead. Though the lizardman's brain is smaller than his eyeball, it still knows hatred and knows revenge. The two zombie lizardmen rushed up the new life that appeared in front of them. And the battle begun. Though calling it a battle is nothing but a mockery. It was more like a slugfest. The first zombie, its body riddled with decay and broken bones, lunged forward with surprising speed. Its claws raked at the champion's chest, but its strike glanced off the beast's thick, scaly hide. The champion responded with a brutal counter, its massive claw smashing into the zombie's torso and sending it skidding across the dirt. The hulking champion stabbed with his spear forward, piercing right through the downed lizardman's chest, causing a volatile fume cloud to burst out of its rotting innards. A faint, sickly green aura permeated the area for now. That must be contagion, but the champion seems unbothered by it. Ludwig thought as he was looking at the battle unfolding. The second zombie capitalized on the first's distraction, rushing the champion from behind. It leapt onto the hulking creature's back, its claws digging into the thick scales near its shoulders. The champion roared, thrashing wildly to shake the undead off, but the zombie held firm, its jaws snapping close on the beast's neck. But as if the boss's neck was made of steel, the bite didn't do any relevant damage but drew some small blood drops. The three went on, fighting amongst each other, while the champion lizardman turned to boss was far superior in terms of reach and strength. Something gnawed at Ludwig. Ludwig's crouched form behind a rocky outcrop was watching the battle unfold. His glowing blue eyes tracked every movement, his mind racing as he analyzed the fight. Why isn't he overpowering them? The answer came too easily to Ludwig as he saw what happened next. The champion was far stronger, faster, and more experienced. It spun in a vicious arc, its spear sweeping low to knock the first zombie who just got up back down. The creature collapsed in a heap, its legs shattered from the impact. The champion lizardman swung a straight fist at the impaled and legless lizardman, but the latter simply grabbed the fist with both arms, supporting its body with nothing but the strength of its rotting knees. What? Ludwig's eyes almost bulged out, though he had no eyes. The look was comic enough to be called absurd, as the smaller zombie was easily overpowering the massive creature and pulled it to the ground. The zombie then snapped the spear that was impaling him using his arm's strength, and then stabbed the spear blade part right onto the champion lizardman's arm and impaled it onto the ground as if crucifying him. The champion was unable to stand up since his hand was locked on the ground and could only fight with one arm pinned. He was standing on his knees as he fought the two off. The champion roared, in both pain and humiliating rage. It used its other hand to grab at the broken shaft of the spear and swung it at the mutilated zombie. Before it could strike, the legless zombie lunged forward again, despite its mangled legs. It grabbed the spear mid-swing, stopping the strike with sheer, unyielding determination. The champion growled in frustration, its muscles straining as it tried to wrest the weapon free. The champion yanked the spear with all its strength, but the zombie refused to let go. Its grip was unrelenting, its rotten muscles fueled by the passive effects of monetized, which grew stronger the more damage it sustained. The beast's golden eyes burned with fury as it slammed the zombie into the ground repeatedly, trying to break its hold. The more it slammed it onto the ground, the more of its bones and flesh would splatter all over the place, causing more contagion to spread. And just as the shaft broke, the champion finished it off with style. A forceful swing of his tree-trunk-thick tail, he caught the zombie that was pinning his arm off guard, slamming his body right against the cave's wall. A massive spray of contagion spread around the area of the cave when the zombie's entire body splattered all over the cave wall and splashed onto the ground around the cave. One of your summoned undead has perished. With one of the two undead gone, only one of them was left. Seeing it refusing to remove itself from its back, the champion simply grabbed the spear and ripped it out of his arm, then used his free hand to pull on the legs of the zombie. He ripped hard enough that both legs of the zombie tore. but the later was still biting tightly onto his neck and grabbing hard with his claws. Ludwig noticed it then, that the bite marks that didn't seem too relevant at first became bigger and fiercer now. More rage boiled inside the champion as he grabbed what was left of the zombie latching onto him and ripped it with both arms. Though one of his hands was recently penetrated by a spear, it still had enough power to simply rip the rest of the zombie's body out of him. And by body, the literal meaning, because the head refused to unlatch. Ludwig was both amazed and confused. After all, the zombie that he summoned had nothing but a head remaining, and it was stuck and refused to unlatch itself from the champion's neck. But no notification of it dying appeared. Then he remembered a zombie does not die unless its head is crushed. But with only a head, the zombie proved to be of little hindrance to the champion, who began looking around for any signs of Ludwig. Damn, he looks angry. But without any heat signature on my undead body, I doubt he'll find me. Ludwig thought to himself. But as fate would ordain, whenever someone speaks it, an explosion happened a few dozen meters behind Ludwig. His heart almost dropped, though he had none. Only then did he remember, he had requested Talia to create a distraction earlier. But why did it have to be right behind where Ludwig was? The behemoth went on all fours and stormed its way toward Ludwig in a heat of roars and vengeance promises. Chapter 53 Cooped Up. Shit, 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 Ludwig muttered under his breath, his skeletal fingers clenching into fists as he saw the towering lizardman champion lock onto him with murderous intent. The beast roared, a sound that tore through the forest like a thunderclap, shaking the leaves and sending small creatures scattering. Its hulking form surged forward with terrifying speed, each step causing the ground to quake. Ludwig didn't wait. He spun on his heels and bolted, his undead body pushing its limits as he ducked and weaved through the dense foliage. Branches snapped against him, and leaves whipped his face, but he didn't falter. Behind him, the champion leaped from the cliff in a single bound, landing with an earth-shattering crash. The ground cracked under the creature's weight, and its claws raked through the dirt as it propelled itself forward. Each stride was a display of raw power, sending splinters of wood and clouds of soil into the air. It bulldozed through trees, smashing some to splinters and ripping others out by their roots. Boulders shattered on impact, and nothing in its path was spared. Ludwig darted to the side just in time to avoid a massive claw that swiped dangerously close to his head. The wind from the strike nearly threw him off balance, but he recovered and dove under a dense thicket. The lizardman's momentum carried it forward, causing it to slam into a tree with a deafening crunch. The ancient trunk groaned and toppled, the crash shaking the forest floor. Dust and debris rose in a thick cloud, creating a momentary screen that obscured the champion's vision. Ludwig took advantage of the chaos, crouching low and grabbing a chunk of rock from the ground. He hurled it with all his might toward a distant cluster of trees. The stone struck with a loud crack, and the champion's head snapped toward the sound. The creature snarled, its golden eyes narrowing as it charged toward the false noise. Ludwig remained still, his undead nature allowing him to suppress even the tiniest sound of breath. He watched the monstrous figure barrel into the trees, its claws raking wildly at the source of the disturbance. Only when the champion had moved far enough away did Ludwig exhale, a purely instinctual habit, and step cautiously back onto the forest path. Good, that should buy me some time, he muttered, wiping the dirt off his hands. His mind raced as he plotted his next move. The champion was too strong to face alone, especially now that it had gone into a frenzy. Its wounds, while significant, weren't enough to stop it, and Ludwig had no illusions about his odds in a direct fight. He needed help, specifically, the other students. But the thought brought a twinge of doubt. Had they survived? The blooded state of the champion suggested they'd put up a fight, but he had no way of knowing the outcome. For all he knew, they could be dead, and he'd be running straight toward more corpses. Only one way to find out, Ludwig muttered, breaking into a sprint toward the eastern clearing where the flag had been. His undead body gave him an edge. Endless stamina and enhanced night vision allowed him to navigate the treacherous forest with ease. He ducked under low branches, sidestepped gnarled roots, and slipped through narrow gaps between the trees, his pace relentless. As he approached the clearing, the sight that greeted him filled him with a mix of relief and unease. The area was littered with lizard-man corpses, their bodies twisted and broken. Blood pooled in the grass, and the air was thick with the stench of death. But there were no human bodies among the carnage. Ludwig froze, scanning the scene for any signs of life. His ears twitched as he heard a faint rustling from the bushes nearby. He turned sharply, his glowing blue eyes locking onto a figure emerging from the foliage. "Hoyo," Ludwig called, recognizing the mud-covered student. The boy's face was grim, his expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Ludwig," he said, his voice shaky. "You're alive. Thank the gods." "What's the situation?" Ludwig asked, stepping closer. Hoyo hesitated, glancing back toward the forest as if expecting the champion to burst through the trees at any moment. "Cassandra's hurt," he said finally. "And one of us didn't make it." Ludwig's jaw tightened. "What about the others?" "The nobles took the worst of it," Hoyo continued. "3 of them are dead, and Bronze Arm is shattered. If it wasn't for you, we'd all be dead by now." Ludwig ignored the compliment, his mind already moving to the next problem. "Where's our group now?" Hoyo gestured toward the east. "We've regrouped with the nobles. Cassandra told me to wait near the flag for you." Ludwig's brow furrowed. "Why would they leave you here?" Hoyo shrugged, but his discomfort was clear. Bron thought it was a good idea. Said the cave nearby would make a good base to defend from. Everyone's holed up in there now. Ludwig's eyes widened in disbelief. "A cave?" Hoyo nodded. "Damn it," Ludwig cursed, running a hand over his face. "That idiot doesn't realize he's setting them up to be cornered. If the champion breaks through, they'll have nowhere to run." "Wait, the champion? The big guy?" Hoyo asked, his voice rising in alarm. "We drove it off. It ran away in pain, and we killed its minions. It's over, right?" As if to mock his words, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the forest. It was a sound that froze the blood, or, in Ludwig's case, whatever ichor flowed in his undead veins. "He doesn't think so," Ludwig said grimly, motioning toward the source of the howl. Hoyo's face went pale. "We have to warn them." "Then start running," Ludwig snapped, already moving. The two bolted through the forest, Ludwig's steps eerily silent despite his speed, while Hoyo's frantic breathing and snapping branches marked his presence like a beacon. Ludwig didn't blame him. Fear had a way of loosening one's control, and they didn't have the luxury of slowing down. The howls grew louder every second, reverberating through the trees and making the ground tremble. Ludwig risked a glance behind him but saw nothing yet. That didn't comfort him. It only meant the champion was faster than it appeared. "Keep moving," Ludwig urged, his voice sharp. "Don't stop, no matter what." Hoyo nodded, too winded to reply. The cave appeared like a beacon, nestled at the edge of a clearing with a narrow entrance that would have been easily defensible under normal circumstances. But Ludwig knew better. He could almost picture the inevitable disaster. A horde of enraged lizardmen or, worse, the champion barreling through the entrance like an unstoppable force. As they neared the cave, a voice called out, "You're back." Ludwig skidded to a halt, eyes locking onto a boy standing guard near the entrance. His body was caked in mud, the smell of damp earth clinging to him like a shield. "They put you on guard duty?" Hoyo asked, his tone tinged with disbelief. The boy shrugged. "They said since I was already covered in mud, I'd be less of a target. Plus, they've barricaded the entrance from the inside." Ludwig felt a vein, or whatever an undead had, throb in frustration. "Barricades? Against that thing?" Before the boy could answer, Bron emerged from the cave, his arm bound in a crude splint and his face set in a scowl. His usual haughty demeanor had taken a hit, but his arrogance still clung to him like a bad smell. "What the fuck are you doing back here?" Bron barked, his voice cutting through the tense air. Chapter 54 Betrayal. "What's wrong with him?" Ludwig asked. "Oh, apparently." Before Hoyo could explain, 2 more nobles came out. One of them was the golden-haired noble woman Antalya. "What's going on here?" The golden-haired noble woman asked. Minerva. Don't butt in, Bronn snapped, wanting to upkeep his persona as a leader. But from what Ludwig could see, his attempt was failing miserably. You have no right or authority to tell me what to do, Bronn, she stated and turned to Ludwig. You're the boy who went out earlier, Ludwig? Right, she said. Yes, but enough of the introductions. Why are you cooped up in a cave? You're raising your heat signature. Ludwig said. So? We already chased the lizard men away. All we need to do is wait for the teachers, she said. The roars began once again, closer this time. You! What have you done? Bronn shouted. You brought that thing back here. Shut your trap, Ludwig snarled. You didn't think twice before huddling up in a cave like idiots. Also, I didn't bring anything here. It was coming here anyways. I already warned you guys to lower all heat signatures, and from what I see, you idiots have a fire going inside the cave. Not to mention how utterly fucking stupid that is, because you'll all choke from the smoke long before morning comes. It further heats the cave. Ludwig's rage seemed completely justified, and Talia intervened. Though the gash in her leg had healed, it looked like it still hurt as she limped twice. It's good to see you okay, Ludwig, but please calm down. Ludwig sighed and said, I'm calm. Don't worry about me. Regardless, how is your leg? It's fine, Talia said. So it was true that you saved Talia? Minerva asked. Why wouldn't it be true? Ludwig frowned. Talia immediately interjected. They didn't believe me when I told them how you saved us from captivity, especially since Tommy refused to acknowledge it. Ludwig once again remembered how that cowardly bastard acted before and after he was saved, and thought once again that he should have just let him rot in there. But Ludwig, what did you do inside the cave? She asked. I killed the 2 guards and the queen, thinking that she is the boss of this dungeon. Ludwig explained in a matter-of-factly manner. You? A stupid, weak commoner? Stop the lies. You must have angered them. You're the cause of all of this. Bronn, finally thinking he had found an opportunity to jump in, shouted. Ludwig was thinking of doing a few not-so-healthy things to this guy but refrained from any action. What's going on? More people began exiting the cave after hearing the commotion. This bastard brought that monster here. Bronn began accusing Ludwig. After all, his failure to lead them could only be forgiven if he put the blame on someone else. And the nobles would easily follow his words than some random commoner. Then why is he here? The students protested. Yes. Go away. If you're being hunted by that thing, why did you come here? Another said. The group continued shifting and putting the blame on Ludwig, who only got angrier and angrier. There is no helping if a mob of people were to take a single person and make him the designated scapegoat for sacrifice. Masses are dangerous, and Ludwig knew it well. Even a king will fall if his nobles turn their back on him. And Ludwig was no king. The trees near the cave began folding and tearing down. Seeing the ugly smirk on Bronn's face, Ludwig realized that things were going to get ugly. You brought this on yourself. Don't blame me for punishing you accordingly. Bronn turned his head to the cave. Moses! Now! He shouted. Suddenly, the cave turned cold and chilly as a wave of cold air and even frost came out of the cave. What are you doing? Ludwig asked as he noticed the cave being frozen over. Like you said, they can only see heat, Bronn said as he stepped back. What are you doing, Bronn? Minerva shouted. The students were all confused. It seemed like Bronn and the Moses guy agreed upon something without informing the rest of the group. What needs to be done? Though I was going to do this to one of the commoners, you're a better target. After all, I heard you're fast on your 2 feet. Immolate spirit. Bronn said as he pointed his hand at Ludwig. You have received the buff, immolate spirit. All your physical attacks will deal fire damage. Your vitality has increased by 10% duration 3 minutes. Ludwig's body felt as if it was on fire, though it wasn't harmful. It was just in time for the last tree behind them to tear and break down. The eyes of the Lizardman champion were fully focused on Ludwig, who had a glowing orange aura around him. You son of a bitch! Ludwig cursed as the mass of muscles roared and rushed toward him. You can't get inside the cave. It'll follow you and kill off the rest of your classmates. I'm sure you don't want that. Bronn laughed out as he backed away, pulling with him Minerva. Though she protested she wasn't strong enough to resist someone from the Steel family even if he only used one arm. Ludwig's eyes scanned around him in a split second. The nobles that were protesting against Ludwig dipped inside the cold cave. While Talia looked ready to help, her limp didn't help her much, nor was Ludwig thinking of asking her for help. Without hesitation, Ludwig turned and snatched the dagger on Hoyo's belt and simply kicked him square in the chest from the incoming behemoth that lunged with all of its body's weight where the two were just standing. Ludwig stammered to his feet. "Come here, you fat fuck!" He shouted and bolted away from the area. "Ludwig!" Hoyo shouted, but his cries fell on deaf ears as the lizard man simply ignored the group and rushed after the most visible one. Ludwig disappeared in the foliage of the forest while the whole scenery behind him was crumbling to bits and pieces. Chapter 55 An Undead Resolve. Ludwig's frame disappeared from and through the foliage. He was thinking of how he'd have to deal with this creature. To fight it head-on would mean Ludwig's death, though he still has some souls to use in case he died to return back from death. He felt that all his progress today would be wasted. And he really didn't need to meet Deus Necros so soon anyway. The hulking beast roared as it bore through two close trees, spreading them with ease using its arms to rupture the trees from their center. Ludwig saw that although the creature's palm was bleeding from the gaping hole in it and the undead lizardman's head was still relentlessly clinging to his neck, the champion seemed to be in so much rage that he wasn't feeling any of that. Ludwig scanned the champion's status window in that moment. *****. Level 25. Damage 80 to 100. HP 1100 to 500. Tier Rare Boss Skull. Status effects: bleeding, laceration, poisoned, enraged. *****. The status elements were stacking up on the boss. The lizardman zombie head was causing it constant contagion, poison and bleeding, and the lacerated wound on its hand was also bleeding it out. But its enraged status was making it oblivious to all of that. Ludwig knew well that if he were to keep running away simply, the boss would soon fall to its knees dead. There was only one problem with that plan. A tree trunk came hurling at Ludwig's head. Ludwig flung himself to the side, desperately dodging the trunk, and at the same time rolled forward and continued running. The lizard man was bound to catch up to him. At this point, Ludwig slightly regretted not investing in agility. Strength and endless stamina are fine, but they serve no purpose when you need to be quick on your feet. Ludwig rolled to his feet and sprinted forward, finding nothing but a standing cliff in front of him. He felt like a sitting duck as the champion was running up to him head first. Both arms opened forward as if to hug him in a bear hug, or lizard man hug in this case. The absurdity of the situation made Ludwig respond in the same tone. Instead of moving left or right and being caught by either of the open arms of the lizard man, Ludwig decided to run up the creature and slide right under him while the latter grabbed at the empty air since Ludwig's relatively shorter form allowed him to duck faster in a slide. The lizard man who was sprinting at full force couldn't stop as it stared under its crotch where Ludwig just slid from. Though it tried to act fast, raising its tail and swinging it down, its feet weren't stopping as its face met the cliffside. A loud explosive sound echoed behind Ludwig, loud enough that even he winced, and strong enough that boulders and fractures of rock formations began crumbling and cascading down the cliff edge. Ludwig saw that the lizard man who went face first into the wall was clearly in a stunned state. Disoriented and unable to stand up properly, had two choices. The first was to run away while the champion was stunned. But that would only buy him some time before the lizard man would catch up to him. After all, he won't be as lucky to stun it again, nor does he know if he could replicate that stupid stunt again. The second option was far riskier but had a greater chance of success. Ludwig did quick maths. Between the two options, safe now, risky later, or risky now, safe later, the latter sounded far more appealing. He rushed up the lizardman's tail and onto his back. He used the zombie's clasping head as a handhold while he raised the dagger he took from Hoyo earlier high and slammed it as powerfully as he could into the champion's left eye. A roar that would wake the dead ruptured out of the champion lizardman's mouth, and with it came a brutal retaliation. As if the dagger in its eye was enough to awaken it from its stunned state, the lizardman went for a grab on Ludwig. By sheer dumb luck, Ludwig's body was nothing but a skeleton, quite lighter than a normal human body, and since the champion tried to grab him, The mere contact between the palm of the champion was enough to send Ludwig reeling into the forest before the arm could even close its fingers. 65 HP. Your chest is fractured. You broke 3 rib bone, your skull is fractured, your right arm is fractured. Your strength has been reduced by 20%. You successfully negated concussion. Ludwig's sprawled form was enough to tell tales of his pains. Though he didn't feel any, the broken bits and pieces of his body were only held together by the slime that was making the outer layer of his skeletal frame. That almost killed me, Ludwig said as he looked at the creature who was finally aware enough to lock eyes with Ludwig's fallen form. Ludwig had no intention of staying on the ground, and simply stood up, turned and left dust behind him. Son of a bitch, when is this buff ever going to stop? Ludwig cursed as he was once again reminded of Bron's fuckery of giving him a buff that made him a living human torch, though he was dead and a skeleton. And just as the thought finished in Ludwig's mind, the aura around him began dying down, but not fast enough as the lizard man had locked his eye on him. The champion, fueled by enough rage that even a berserker would tell him to calm down, ruptured through the forest and anything around him with only one thought in mind, to bring as much pain onto the human that had caused him so much heartache and bodily harm that its wounds would be called minor in comparison. Ludwig tried his best to run away, but the creature was gaining up on him, and fast, enough that he could feel its breathing on his neck. In his panic, Ludwig didn't notice the large tree root extending in front of him. His leg got caught and he fell down on his face. The champion didn't miss the opportunity to jump up and catch Ludwig on the ground. He then rolled Ludwig forward and shoved his open jaw onto his body. With nothing but sheer will and panic, Ludwig swung his entire body to the side, but didn't manage to fully avoid the jaws that dug onto the ground. His left arm was caught in between them. With a forceful rip, as would an alligator do to an unfortunate limb, Ludwig's arm simply snapped free from the elbow. There was no pain in Ludwig's eyes as he recognized the imminent death. But though undead, no longer one with breath, something deep within him, something he didn't think he had anymore. A feeling so simply so innocent and so strange that Ludwig couldn't describe welled up inside him. Some might call it human nature to never give up and struggle till the end, and some might call it foolishness in front of death. But for Ludwig, it was simplified in 2 words. Fuck it. I'm sorry, Thomas, he said as he used Thomas's teachings, drawing from Thomas's emotion to fuel his own magic. Rage, enough rage that it was hot and blistering. His right arm flared with as much mana as his body could muster in that desperate situation. The lizardman's eyes couldn't recognize the manifesting fireball in Ludwig's arm as his hot body aura was still camouflaging it. And just as it opened its mouth to bite off Ludwig's head, the latter shot his arm forward into the gaping jaws of death. Explosion is art. Ludwig roared out. Chapter 56 cleared. Ludwig's hand sent out all the mana in his body. Unlike what he had hoped for to create a fireball and shoot it inside the lizardman's mouth, he forgot to ask Thomas for an important thing. How do mags usually shoot out spells? Unwilling to spend time to think of the hows, Ludwig simply acted on instinct. Van Dijk had mentioned to him that magic is about one's will, imagination, and emotion. Right now, Ludwig's imagination was that of a flaming fireball that was to blow up and turn his enemy to cinders. In that regard, he had things worked out. As for his emotions, he borrowed Thomas's rage. While the final and most important part, the will, was simply Ludwig's own intention of not wanting to die a dog's death, and fueled all his power and rage into his arm, disregarding any measures of safety and care. So instead of creating a fireball, Ludwig's entire arm exuded roaring and raging flames, that not only was several times stronger than what Thomas showed, but it was mighty enough that it blasted the head off the lizard-man champion, while scorching Ludwig's entire arm, making the slime covering it wince away, revealing Ludwig's skeletal frame. The flames were loud, mighty and powerful enough that they shone like a beacon of light in the darkened night. The explosion, both sound and visual, was so powerful that the entire group of students heard it. Some would even say that they felt the vibration. This spell was far stronger than anything Ludwig's embedded mana crystal on his forehead could afford, and the latter simply shattered upon him using the first spell ever. Congratulations! The notification showed up in front of Ludwig like a declaration of victory. You have successfully cleared Forest Lizardmen's semi-artificial dungeon. You have obtained Weak Soul from slaying Forest Lizardman Champion. 4. Having fought to the last second without ever thinking of cowering away from the face of death. You have obtained the achievement, Unyielding. Achievement, Unyielding. Rarity, Rare. Increased mental resistance when lower on health. Increase in all physical and mental abilities proportional to the damage taken, up to 10%. You have learned a new spell. Available spell slots, 1/2. Self-immolation fire. Self-immolation, discard a part or all of your body by using it to fuel flames and mana. The power of the spell depends on how large is the part one is sacrificing. A self-created spell that would cause one to sacrifice a part or all of their body by burning mana vigorously. A spell that is rarely ever learned or practiced and is known to be a favorite of zealots and fanatics. Ludwig's left arm was flung several meters away from him. Notification of him having been amputated and having lost more bones were ignored. And his health points were at an incredibly low level of 13,300. Author note, 1. I need more HP. I almost died, man. He said as he pulled his body desperately with one arm barely functioning as it was scorched black. The slime on his body slowly covered the burned skeletal arm that had several marks of teeth and sharp cuts on the bones. He picked himself up and looked around the body. Usually these bosses drop something. There's not a single piece of gear dropped from them. He sighed as he found no worth or value from having risked his life so much. He then slowly limped his way toward his ripped arm and grabbed it with his other burnt arm. Ludwig looked at his waning health and the arm in his hand. He sighed, said, Use weak soul. You have obtained 100 souls. Not bad. I guess the Lizardman boss gave a more valuable soul, because it's a boss and all that. Level up my agility. Author's note, 1/10. 40 souls have been used to upgrade your agility by 10. Congratulations. Your soul level has increased to level 4. Ludwig was waiting for his wounds to magically heal up as all characters would once they level up, but there was nothing like that. I guess I hoped too much. Man, it'll be awkward to explain this if someone were to see me like this, he said, as if he was a jinx to himself. Ludwig, the moment he heard the voice, he turned to see Talia limping forward, and next to her was a wide-eyed Minerva and Hoyo alongside Bron, who was unable to close his mouth from shock. Minerva screamed out as she saw Ludwig's arm. Only then did he realize that he was holding his arm and it would be revealed to them all that he is an undead. Ludwig's mind was stammering to find some way to explain things. You're bleeding so much, Minerva said as her hands turned green. Come here, she shouted. I'll stem the bleeding. As an undead, receiving a heal with your current low health will undoubtedly kill you. No! Ludwig shouted as he tried to stop Minerva from coming any closer. The only problem was that he tried to stop her with his hand, which was holding his other arm. The limp skeletal arm flailed in front of her and she almost passed out. I have to heal you. Can you not see how much blood you're losing? She shouted. No healing, Ludwig said. He thought for a second. If you heal my arm, it'll mend the wound and I won't be able to attach it. Just give me a rope or anything to stem the bleeding. You rather die than lose an arm? Minerva shouted back as she got closer with her glowing hands. Woman, you're gonna be the death of me if you don't get that heal away from me. But he couldn't say that out loud. The dungeon is already cleared. The teachers should be here any second, he added. Who told you that? Bron said, just because you killed this lizard which we already wounded enough for you. You think that the dungeon is clear? There is still a boss here, you dumbass, Bron added with a sneer. Yet just as he finished his words, the whole sky turned bright white as day, and suddenly a golden-haired man showed up right in front of the group, smiles and all. What wonderful students I have. You actually survived, he added. For the health, I forgot to mention that the main character's health will increase by a base of 100 per level up and 10 per vigor point. Agility was missing from the main character's status screen. Agility assists one in their speed and maneuverability. Chapter 57 Court? It was the same person who had sent them into this hellhole. The man who had casually thrown them into their very first trial. A survival challenge where life and death blurred like oil on water. The person they were supposed to trust, to look to for guidance and protection. The teacher, Professor Olim. Ludwig could barely suppress the venom in his tone as he rasped the name, his skeletal hand still clutching his detached arm. "Oh my, look what we have here," Olim said, his voice a smooth blend of amusement and mockery. His sharp eyes scanned Ludwig's mangled form. "That arm of yours is in pretty bad shape. TSK, TSK. What a shame. But, I must say, this is a delightful scene." Olim's lips curled into a grin, sharp as a knife. The teacher's gaze shifted, taking in the battered, mud-smeared students who had gathered around him. "You've all done splendidly. Watching you run around like headless chickens. Now that was entertainment. But..." He turned to Bron, who was visibly fuming. "Some of you did better than others." Bron's face flushed red, his jaw clenched tight. Olim ignored him and clapped his hands together. A loud crack resounded, and suddenly the entire class was no longer in the forest. The oppressive darkness of the dungeon was gone, replaced by the bright daylight outside the forest's edge. The transition was so jarring that many stumbled, blinking and disoriented. It took a moment for them to realize where they were. The clearing. The exact spot where they had begun this horrific trial. A flicker of hope danced across Ludwig's mind. For a brief, naive moment, he wondered if this had all been some sort of elaborate illusion, a magical test with no real stakes. After all, what kind of insane person would design a trial where students, teenagers, could actually die? But that hope was crushed the moment he noticed the bodies. Mangled, crushed, lifeless. The corpses of several students lay sprawled across the clearing, their limbs twisted in unnatural angles, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Gasps and cries erupted among the survivors. "No, no, this can't be real," one girl whispered, clutching her head in disbelief. "You!" Bron's voice roared above the chaos. His composure snapped like a brittle twig as he stormed toward Olim. "You should have warned us. What kind of teacher throws their students into something like this without protection? Do you even understand how much we suffered? 3 nobles died. How are you going to explain?" Bron's tirade ended as abruptly as it began. Olim moved faster than anyone could react, his fist colliding with Bron's stomach in a devastatingly precise blow. The boy crumpled to his knees, gagging as bile and half-digested food splattered onto the ground. The atmosphere shifted, heavy and suffocating. Olim no longer wore his amused smirk. His expression was now cold, clinical, a predator sizing up prey. "I don't take kindly to being lectured by children," Olim said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Whoever told you about the content of this exam should have also told you to watch your tongue. Your family name means nothing to me, boy. Even your Steelheart clan would tremble before my shadow." Bron writhed on the ground, clutching his stomach, unable to respond. The chilling silence that followed was shattered by a voice colder than death itself. If there was anyone who Ludwig thought of as scarier than the current teacher talking, fakery of death has activated. Speak of the devil. Now, Olim. Let's not frighten the young ones too much." The temperature seemed to drop as the new figure stepped into view, his presence as commanding as it was terrifying. He wore flowing Gothic robes adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe like living shadows. His pale face bore a calm, almost playful smile, but his hollow, piercing gaze sent shivers through everyone present. Olim turned, and for the first time, his posture shifted to one of deference. "Tower Master Van Dijk. A pleasure, as always." "The pleasure is all mine, Professor Olim," Van Dijk replied smoothly, his voice like silk draped over a steel blade. His eyes swept over the gathered students, lingering momentarily on Ludwig before he continued. "It seems this year's batch has shown remarkable resilience. I must say, I'm impressed." Olim chuckled, his earlier menace melting away like mist. "Impressed? Are you? Well, some of them have potential. Though I must admit, I had my doubts about a few." He glanced pointedly at Bron, who was still struggling to regain his breath. Van Dijk's gaze locked onto Ludwig. "Speaking of potential, there's my pupil. Though I must say, he's looking a bit worse for wear." Olim's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, your disciple is here? Ludwig, right?" Van Dijk tilted his head slightly. "How did you know?" Olim's grin returned, wider than ever. How could I not? Who else would be insane enough to blow their own arm off inside the mouth of an enraged lizard man? Especially after losing the other one already. Ha! Van Dijk's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed. Ludwig froze, his mind racing. The lantern embedded in his body had always cloaked his undead nature, making him appear human to anyone who didn't know otherwise. But Olim's sharp observation felt like it had come dangerously close to piercing that veil. Olim continued, oblivious to the tension. Not to mention, he added, he refused healing from his classmates, insisting on reattaching his arm instead. The kid's got guts, or sheer madness. Either way, I like him. Van Dijk chuckled softly. Indeed. Ludwig has always been resourceful. Olim clapped his hands again, making the remaining students vanish in a flash of light. Only Ludwig and Van Dijk remained. Let's get you to the infirmary, Van Dijk said, his tone unusually gentle. Yes, that would be best, Olim agreed. The nobles might not complain if their kids die during a test, but if they survive only to perish afterward, well, let's just say I'd rather avoid the paperwork. Besides, there's something I need to discuss with your student. Van Dijk raised an eyebrow. Oh! Olim turned to Ludwig, his gaze sharp as a dagger. Tell me, Ludwig, how is it that you know how to use necromancy? Chapter 58 Conversation. Van Dijk's calculating gaze lingered on Ludwig before flicking back to Olim. Interesting things must have happened in the trial grounds, he remarked, his voice calm but laced with intrigue. Olim smirked. Oh, you could say that. I have a complete recording of everything that transpired. It's a monitored dungeon, after all. His expression turned slightly more serious as he looked at Ludwig. But your actions beg a clear question, Ludwig. You used necromancy, a practice considered foul and forbidden by the Empire's laws. Yet, you did so to save others, an act that commands respect. A morally just use of an immoral art. Olim crossed his arms, his tone shifting to a mix of authority and begrudging approval. Seeing the state of your arm, however, I'll refrain from chewing you out for now. Get yourself fixed up. Once you're done, I want a detailed written report on my desk. Explain why you chose to use necromancy and justify its application in this scenario. Understood. Yes, Professor, Ludwig replied, his tone flat and resigned. Come with me, Ludwig, Van Dijk said, his words more of a command than an invitation. He placed a hand on Ludwig's shoulder, and before the latter could react, the world around them vanished. The two of them reappeared at the pinnacle of the Black Tower, the Tower Master's sanctum. Ludwig instantly recognized the circular room, a space that seemed to defy logic and time. Walls were lined with towering shelves crammed with ancient tomes, forbidden manuscripts, and curiosities of the arcane. Jars containing preserved organs and creatures of grotesque anatomy lined the darker corners, while alchemical tools and strange artifacts were scattered across workbenches. The room felt like a blend of library, laboratory, and museum, a place where knowledge and experimentation danced on the edge of madness. Van Dijk closed the portal with a wave of his hand and moved to his ornate chair, sitting with the poise of someone used to authority. He steepled his fingers beneath his nose, his gaze sharpening as it settled on Ludwig. Now, he began, his voice carrying a weight that silenced even the ambient hum of the room. Do you have anything you'd like to say to me? Ludwig stood silently for a moment, his skeletal arm hanging awkwardly at his side. I do not, he replied flatly. Van Dijk's lips curved into a slight smile, though it carried no warmth. I have little patience for those who hide things from me, especially when they do it poorly. Tell me, Ludwig, how did you manage to convince a sixth-tier mage like Olim that you're human? The question was a dagger aimed at Ludwig's carefully constructed facade. Before he could form a response, a cold sensation swept through his body. A familiar notification appeared in his mind. Necro's blessing has activated. Ludwig's limbs went limp, his entire frame slumping as if life itself had drained out of him. His grip on his severed arm faltered, and it fell to the ground with a dull clatter. Van Dijk immediately sensed the change. His instincts screamed of danger. He leapt from his chair, his hands moving in a blur as he chanted a rapid string of incantations. Snare, bounds of Latvia, anchor dead, vow of silence. For spells burst forth almost simultaneously, their energies intertwining as they enveloped Ludwig. Invisible chains of magic wrapped around his form, rooting him to the spot and immobilizing his limbs. A glowing sigil formed beneath him, anchoring him in place and suppressing any chance of teleportation. Finally, a veil of silence wrapped around him, sealing his ability to cast or speak incantations. Van Dijk's aura shifted dramatically. The calm, collected mage was gone, replaced by a man radiating pure, controlled hostility. His crimson eyes narrowed as he studied Ludwig, whose body was now unnaturally still. But then Ludwig spoke. His voice was not his own. The arrogance of mortals, to wield magic so freely upon the very source that grants it. No wonder you lack true piety. The words were laced with an otherworldly resonance, echoing as if spoken from the depths of eternity. Van Dijk's eyes widened in alarm. How are you speaking? You shouldn't be able to move, let alone talk. Breaking these spells would require the power of an 8th-tier mage. And yet, his voice trailed off as realization dawned. No, this isn't Ludwig. Who are you? A chuckle emanated from Ludwig's lips, though it was laced with something far more sinister. A smart one, I see. You're correct. Who you're speaking to is not the one who stood before you moments ago. Van Dijk's mind raced, formulating contingencies and escape plans. Whatever force now occupied Ludwig's body had obliterated his restraints in a fraction of a second, a feat that no mortal should be capable of. I'm certain I was speaking to my student earlier, Van Dijk said cautiously, testing the waters. You were, the voice replied. But now, you face another. I am the inevitable, the one whom all shall meet, without exception. The same as your dearest Milani. The mention of that name froze Van Dijk in his tracks. His entire body stiffened, his eyes blazing crimson as raw fury surged through him. The temperature in the room plummeted, frost forming on the edges of the bookshelves as his aura darkened. Calm yourself, vampire. The voice commanded, its tone sharp and unyielding. The words were enough to douse Van Dijk's raging anger, though his expression remained tense. How do you know that name? He whispered, his voice trembling. He was more interested of the fact that this thing knew of Milani more than his hidden identity as a vampire. If we continue this pointless exchange of emotions, you'll gain nothing of value. I suggest you focus. Ludwig's possessed form shifted slightly, its eerie gaze locking onto Van Dijk. I will grant you 3 questions. Use them wisely, for once they are asked, I shall depart. Van Dijk took a moment to collect himself, though his mind raced. He had countless questions, but he knew he had to prioritize. Where is my wife? He asked, his voice steady but heavy with grief. She is dead, came the flat reply. Van Dijk closed his eyes, suppressing the wave of anguish that threatened to consume him. He had known this truth deep down, but hearing it spoken aloud shattered any lingering hope. What is your purpose in using Ludwig? To achieve a goal of mine, the voice replied, devoid of elaboration. Van Dijk's frustration mounted. The answers were painfully vague, and he only had one question left. He needed something concrete, something actionable. He took a deep breath. Where can I find the Bloodhound? Chapter 59 Forgotten Memories. That isn't a question I can answer, the voice said coldly. It would break the rules. Van Dijk stiffened. Rules? He didn't know if this was a bluff or some cosmic law binding this entity, but the cryptic response left him no choice. He needed to ask wisely. Ask again, the voice commanded. Van Dijk's thoughts churned as he sought clarity, but the black tower groaned ominously, the very walls trembling as if some colossal weight bore down upon its foundations. His domain, his sanctuary, was under assault, not by any physical force, but by a power so profound it seeped into the fabric of reality itself. Van Dijk's gaze flickered to Ludwig, or rather, the being inhabiting his student's body. The boy's expression remained eerily calm despite the tremors, a stillness that sent a chill down the Tower Master's spine. What's causing this disturbance? Van Dijk demanded. The entity's face betrayed no emotion, but its lips twisted into a faint, mocking smile. You already know the answer to that. You fear it, as all mortals do. Van Dijk's fists clenched at his sides, nails biting into his palms as his mind reeled. The pressure in the room grew heavier, making it difficult to breathe, yet Ludwig, or the thing pretending to be him, remained unaffected. The Tower Master inhaled deeply, forcing his thoughts to align. He shifted tactics, abandoning questions of the unknown. You wouldn't protect Ludwig if he weren't significant to your purpose, he said. But he's inexperienced. A child in this dangerous game. If he's so important, then let me take on his duty instead. I am far better equipped. For the first time, the entity's expression shifted, a faint smile, enigmatic and unsettling. An interesting proposal. But I do not trust mortals. Your ambition is too fickle, your resolve too easily swayed. Van Dijk's jaw tightened. Then what purpose does he serve that I cannot fulfill? Instead of answering directly, the entity leaned forward slightly, as if to deliver a secret meant only for Van Dijk. I shall leave you with a gift, a tip, if you will, since you have proven yourself a worthy mentor to this child. The revenge you so desperately crave will never be yours by your own hands. You lack the power, and your enemies know this. However, the room seemed to darken further, the shadows deepening around the entity as its tone dropped to a whisper. This child will grow capable of achieving what you cannot. Aid his growth, and the vengeance you seek may one day be in your grasp. But mark my words, Van Dijk, when the cost of your desire is laid bare, you may find it heavier than you can bear. Van Dijk froze, the weight of the words sinking in like lead. Then, to Ludwig's surprise, the Tower Master threw his head back and began to laugh, a cold, manic cackle that reverberated through the chamber like shattered glass. The cost! Van Dijk roared, his crimson eyes gleaming with unholy fervor. I would pay my very life, my soul, if need be, to have his heart in my hands. No price is too great. The smile on Ludwig's face, if it could be called Ludwig's, widened ever so slightly. Then nurture this child, and your wish shall be fulfilled. That is all I will say. The entity's voice faded, and with it, the oppressive atmosphere in the room began to lift. Ludwig's body shuddered violently as the unearthly presence withdrew, leaving him to slump to the ground. Van Dijk's reaction was immediate. Dispel bindings, he muttered, releasing the spells he had cast earlier. Ludwig groaned as his limbs regained motion, blinking rapidly as he took in his surroundings. He noticed the shattered remains of an ink vial on the desk, the scattered books, and the faint glow of dissipating magical seals. What happened? He asked, his voice hoarse. Van Dijk loomed over him, his piercing gaze betraying none of his inner turmoil. You don't remember? Ludwig shook his head. I just walked in, and then everything went blank. Van Dijk leaned back, crossing his arms as he regarded the boy with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Do you know why the tower itself began to tremble? Why my spells failed against you? Ludwig's confusion deepened. I don't understand what you mean. Van Dijk sighed heavily, the weight of what had just occurred pressing down on him. It's fine, he said at last, though his tone was anything but. For now, we'll let this be. But tell me, how is it that you came to use necromancy? I'm certain I never taught you that. Ludwig hesitated. I found it in one of the books here, Chilcra Algard's treatise on the arcane. It had a sigil for necromancy in the margins. I memorized it when I saw it and used it during the trial grounds. Van Dijk pinched the bridge of his nose, exasperation evident. Do you know how many laws you broke by using that sigil? Necromancy is a crime punishable by crucifixion. And as if that weren't enough, you flaunted your undead nature by walking around holding your severed arm as if it were a party favor. There's a reason for that, Ludwig replied defensively. Van Dijk arched an eyebrow. Oh, this I must hear. Enlighten me. Ludwig recounted everything that had happened in the testing grounds, his desperate battles, the use of necromancy to create the undead lizardmen, and the explosive finale with the champion. He spoke with conviction, justifying his decisions as survival tactics, though he faltered when describing his reckless charges into danger. Van Dijk listened intently, nodding occasionally but making no comment. When Ludwig finished, the Tower Master tapped his chin thoughtfully. I can see your reasoning. Still, using necromancy is never justifiable, even in desperate circumstances. You could have stayed with the group instead of foolishly rushing into the boss room. A teacher would have intervened if the test dragged on or enough students died. I didn't know that, Ludwig admitted. None of us did. I acted on a hunch. Van Dijk's crimson eyes narrowed. And how do you explain this? He gestured to Ludwig's skeletal arm. Everyone, including a 6th-tier mage, swore you were bleeding like any other human. Yet I see nothing but bare bones. Ludwig hesitated. That. Before he could answer, the lantern at his side shimmered into view, glowing faintly. Van Dijk's eyes locked onto it, and his expression shifted instantly. He staggered back, gripping his head as memories he was certain that they were never there before flooded his mind. Flashes of the past, fragmented and chaotic, overwhelmed him. The lantern, once seemingly unremarkable, now burned with an inexplicable familiarity. He saw visions of a distant battlefield, of fallen comrades and endless carnage. And then he saw her. Milani. Van Dijk whispered, his voice cracking. Ludwig watched, bewildered, as Van Dijk's composure shattered. What's happening? He asked, but the Tower Master was too lost in his own torment to answer. How come you have his lantern? Van Dijk's eyes blared in red flaring lights. The lantern's glow intensified, casting long, eerie shadows across the chamber. Whatever secrets it held, they were now clawing their way to the surface. Chapter 60 Forgotten Past. More than hundreds of years ago, in the southwest of the Lufondal Empire lay the March of Bostos, a land ruled by one of the most prominent noble families of the Kingdom of Lamar. The Bostos family was old, so ancient, in fact, that legends spoke of their existence long before the Lufondal Empire itself rose to power. Renowned not for their military might but for their staggering wealth, the Bostos family wielded influence that could rival the 7 kingdoms of the empire combined. Yet, despite their strength, the Bostos family showed no interest in power struggles or the throne. They neither bowed to the emperor nor rebelled against him outright. Instead, they stood apart, a looming dragon too proud to kneel but too dormant to provoke. Even the emperor himself, after years of failed attempts to undermine them by empowering rival nobles, had resigned himself to their coexistence. Their territory flourished, unbothered by the turbulence of imperial politics. But beneath the surface of their pristine image was a problem, one that simmered within the walls of the family's opulent mansion. Where is Van Dijk? The furious roar of Dante Bostos, patriarch of the Bostos family, reverberated through the marble corridors of the grand estate. He stood in his study, a man as imposing as the castle itself. Towering at 2 meters tall with a frame like a bear, Dante's presence alone could cow the boldest of warriors. Before him stood a trembling maid, her head bowed low. Though she appeared to be a simple servant, she was anything but. A 4th-tier sword master trained in assassination techniques, her mere presence was enough to unnerve even seasoned warriors. Yet here, in the presence of her enraged master, she dared not lift her gaze. "My lord," she said, her voice laced with fear, "Lord Van Dijk is not in the palace. We've searched every room." Dante's fist slammed down onto the mahogany desk, splintering it into fragments. He held a crumpled piece of parchment in his other hand, his knuckles white with tension. "That idiot son of mine. Bring Celine to me, now." "Yes, my lord." The maid melted into the shadows, disappearing as swiftly and silently as she had come. Moments later, a tall woman in full military regalia entered the room. Her grey hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her icy blue eyes bore a sharpness that rivaled steel. This was Celine, Dante's daughter, a commander whose presence exuded authority. "You called, my lord?" she said, her tone as calm as the sea before a storm. The old man sighed. I told you many times, when we're together, call me father, he said. He then waved the parchment at her, his face red with frustration. That brother of yours. Do you have any idea what he's done this time? Celine's lips quirked in a small, knowing smirk. Which incident are you referring to, father? Was it the time he sold your prized river and sea painting for wine? Or the time he set the Duke of Montana's wig on fire in front of his entire court? Or perhaps the night he drank more than an entire viscount's yearly income? Dante groaned, collapsing into his chair. That boy is going to be the death of me. My old heart can't take this. Exaggerating his antics to get some sympathy of his daughter. Celine moved behind him, her hands deftly massaging his tense shoulders. Father, you can't have heart problems. You're a true vampire, let alone a heart attack. Now, stop the whinging and tell me what is done this time. Dante sighed, his frustration bleeding into melancholy. It's not just his antics, Celine. He's changed since your mother died. Unlike you, he doesn't share my condition. He'll age, he'll grow old, and one day, he'll be gone. It is the fate of all mortals. I can see why you dote on him a lot. Francesca was a gentle and kind woman. What happened to her was out of any of our control. I should have been there if only she kept my keepsake with her. The old man said. She gave it to him. That's what parental love does, father, Celine replied as she rubbed on her father's shoulders. Dante's gaze fell to the parchment in his hand. Still, this time, his crossed a line. He handed it to her, and Celine's eyes scanned the contents. Her lips twitched. Even for him, this is bold. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Meanwhile, in a lively inn on the outskirts of the Bostos territory, the air was thick with the scent of ale, roasted meat, and the faint tang of spilled beer. The dimly lit interior glowed with the warm orange hues of lanterns and a crackling hearth. Wooden beams lined the ceiling, their surfaces scarred from years of rowdy brawls and the occasional drunken axe throw. Laughter and shouts filled the room, mingling with the cheerful tunes of a bard strumming a lute in the corner. Adventurers, merchants, and labourists crowded around tables, their mugs sloshing with frothy ale as they toasted to victories both real and exaggerated. At the center of the chaos stood a young man, shirtless and wiry but brimming with reckless energy. In his hands, he held a massive keg of beer, his grin wide and challenging. "Old man, I'm taking that beard of yours tonight," he shouted, his voice cutting through the din. Across from him stood a burly dwarf, his chest puffed out with the pride of his race. He cradled a keg of his own, his expression one of equal parts amusement and determination. "For a twig of a human, you've got guts," the dwarf bellowed. "But tonight, lad, you'll be the one running naked through the streets." The crowd erupted into cheers and chants of chug, 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 as the two competitors raised their kegs and began to drink. The young man tilted his head back, gulping the frothy liquid with abandon. The keg was almost half his size, but he didn't falter, his determination fueled by both pride and the sheer joy of the moment. Around him, the tavern roared with excitement, the patrons slamming their mugs against the tables in rhythm with the chants. The dwarf matched him gulp for gulp, his beard dripping with beer as he grinned through the challenge. "You're good, lad," he said between swigs. "But you've met your match tonight." The young man wobbled slightly, the weight of the keg and the sheer volume of alcohol beginning to take their toll. But he didn't stop, his grin never faltering even as his legs threatened to give out beneath him. Finally, with a dramatic flourish, he drained the last of his keg and slammed it onto the table. "Ha! Take that, you stubby bastard." But before he could revel in his victory, his knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the floor in a fit of drunken laughter. The dwarf roared with laughter, pounding his chest. "You've got spirit, boy. I'll give you that. But you're no match for a dwarf's liver." The tavern exploded into cheers and laughter, the patrons raising their mugs in salute to the two competitors. The bard struck up a lively tune, and the room seemed to come alive with renewed energy.